A woman disappears. The only clues are an incomplete eyewitness account and 3 dead men on a New York pier. The case takes a bizarre twist when investigators uncover a web of greed, deceit, and even more murder.
244 responded to the triple homicide.
A cold-blooded killer is on the loose. As police track him over 6 states, they are in a race to find a missing woman before more blood is shed and more people die. The solution to these brutal murders rests with a missing material witness. In this program, some of the names have been changed. New York City, Monday, April 12th, 1982. It was the end of the workday, and commuters headed for their cars at a parking facility on the west side of Manhattan. It was just after 6 p.m. when a lone woman made her way across the desolate rooftop parking lot. The lot was located on Pier 92 by the Hudson River, in the midst of the bustling crowds of Midtown Manhattan. As she approached her car, her key would not fit in the driver's side door. The lock was jammed. She had no idea she was in grave danger. A moment later, 3 employees from the CBS television network arrived on the parking deck. They had just gotten off work. As the 3 headed to their cars, they saw a man struggling to load a woman into a van. Concerned, they approached. Another CBS employee, Anthony Silva, was trying to catch up with his friends. He saw them talking to a man behind a silver van. Silva took cover. Silva tried to alert the parking attendant to the shootings taking place 2 stories above. But the man thought he said 3 cars had been hit. He was in no hurry to deal with it.
Come on! Did you hear me? There's been 3 hits upstairs!
As Silva pulled out onto 12th Avenue, he watched to see if the gunman would follow him. The van went the other direction. He rushed back to the parking attendant and insisted he call the police. 3 people had been shot.
Hurry up! Okay.
Okay, 244 responded to the triple homicide.
Police officers were dispatched to the scene and sped towards the parking garage. The crime scene was bloody and grim. New York Police Detective Richard Chartrand.
Systematically, one by one, a search was done of each body. Each one was shot once in the rear of the head. with a small caliber gun. The location of bullet entry would appear that these were assassinations.
A single .22 caliber shell casing lay beside each body. 2 men were found close together. The third was found a short distance away. Like the others, he had been shot in the head at close range. It appeared he tried to run from his assailant. The .22 caliber shell casing was collected. Police feared these weren't the only victims.
We did an extensive search on the pier to make sure there wasn't a 4th or 5th dead body up there. We even had the harbor precinct come in and search the surrounding waters. We didn't want somebody floating that might have jumped off the pier to avoid being shot.
Investigators found no additional bodies. Beside a blue car, they discovered several items. A set of keys, a purse, and a pair of women's shoes. Scuff marks on the back indicated the victim had been dragged. Blood was spattered on the pavement near the car. From the small amount, it appeared the woman was wounded, but how badly, the officers could only guess. A detective took the keys found on the ground and tried to unlock the car. They wouldn't fit.
Hey, Jason, I got a foreign object here.
The lock was jammed with a toothpick. The passenger side door opened. In the glove box, police recovered a license and registration. The car belonged to Melissa Benson of Ridgewood, Queens.
I got Melissa Benson right here.
What happened to her and why was still unclear. Robbery seemed unlikely. In her purse, investigators found credit cards and a wallet full of cash. None of the clues pointed to the killer, but Anthony Silva provided a description.
The shooter was described from 5'5" to 5'8", with a reasonably husky build. He said that there was some sort of a commotion near a van.
Silva told police to look for a gray or silver van with a burgundy stripe down the side.
That's hard to say.
Because of his description of the gunshots, detectives believed these were assassinations. A silencer must have been used. The parking lot was reserved for those with monthly permits. Each person who parked there had to fill out an agreement and could only enter by punching a license plate number into a keypad. The parking attendant provided police with Benson's agreement and those for all the vehicles in the rooftop lot. Detectives took the stack of papers, hoping they would help reveal their killer's identity.
243 dispatch. Be advised, APB on silver or gray van with a red stripe seen leaving the scene with a white female wounded.
As news of the murders spread through police channels, more and more officers joined the search for the killer, who was already long gone. At the crime scene, the press clamored for the story.
It appears that the 3 males apparently happened upon either an altercation or an abduction of some kind. At this point, we are just not sure what happened. Various items which would indicate that the female was present at the scene, women's shoes, women's sunglasses, and some other items are present at the crime scene close to one of the bodies.
As the story broke across the city, New Yorkers were shocked. Reporter Selwyn Robb covered the murders for the New York Times.
Everybody in New York knew about the story. On the night it occurred, 3 men tried to act as good Samaritans. The idea that 3 people during a period when people were very concerned in New York about a soaring crime rate, would intervene and get shot down, blasted away the way they were. So from the start, this was a case that was obviously going to draw a lot of attention.
The grisly murders touched a nerve. Each new piece of information triggered a growing sense of dread across the city.
It sends a real message. Maybe you better not intervene. If you see something happening, it could happen to you. Even in a crowded area, even when you're with when you're 3 men and you think you can handle a situation like that, it isn't one person on a dark street. So that made it very intimidating.
As panic grew, police were under immense pressure to find the killer and Melissa Benson. The faster they could find her, the more likely she would be alive.
Yes, that's Melissa Benson.
Officers first visited her current employer.
She lives in a dark room, right? She usually...
Melissa Benson worked in a camera store as an accountant.
No, she left work the usual way. She punched out.
Her co-worker told the officers before that she worked at a diamond company.
I really don't...
Hoping to find some clue to Melissa Benson's whereabouts, investigators went to her apartment in Queens. The superintendent let them in. The super said he didn't know much about her. Benson kept to herself. For a homebody, however, she was quite familiar to the local police. An officer from the 104th Precinct in Queens knew her.
I know her. I remember her.
Right here?
I know her, yeah.
Miss Benson. That's her.
She became a regular around the precinct after a friend of hers named Debbie Wong disappeared.
Yeah, this was about 6 weeks ago or so.
Are you sure?
Benson feared Debbie Wong was in grave danger.
Are you sure?
The woman never turned up. And now Benson was missing too. Investigators found nothing incriminating in her apartment. Just piles of financial papers, which did not seem unusual for an accountant. According to the Queens officer, Benson said she was working with the FBI.
Let's go.
If she was involved with the Bureau, the next step was clear for Detective Chartrand.
Made a call to the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and dropped a little bomb on him and said, "You guys got something going, and does this name mean anything to you?"
The news Benson was missing was a blow to Agent Robert Paquette. She was the key witness in a multi-million-dollar fraud investigation.
I had received a call from the New York Police Department, and he advised me that there was a murder that took place at Pier 92 in New York City, and that one of the individuals involved was Melissa Benson, in addition to 3 other individuals who were employed by CBS at the time. I was somewhat stunned.
FBI agents agreed to meet with the detective the next day. NYPD detectives and officers patrolled the streets that night, searching for a silver or light-colored van. In the early morning hours, they caught a break. A van and driver matching the general description given by witnesses. Yet no sign of the missing woman. Police brought the man in for questioning. He insisted he knew nothing about the crimes of the missing woman, Melissa Benson.
Information. Tell us everything you know.
He wasn't anywhere near the pier at the time of the murders. They had a suspect in custody, but detectives continued to try and link him to the crime while the man was questioned. They began analyzing parking lot permits.
Oh, great, I missed that. All right, what do you guys got so far?
Well, right now, only thing I've found of interest is about Ms. Benson.
Benson's agreement indicated she had only parked there a few months.
Yeah, we've got hers, we've got a parking space.
It was dated April 1st of that year.
We could find out hers.
Police reviewed the other agreements, hoping to uncover a clue to the killer's identity. Once his alibi checked out, investigators were convinced the man they had in custody was innocent. They released him. The New York police feared they were running out of time if they were to find Melissa Benson alive. On the evening of April 12, 1982, NYPD investigators were grappling with a brutal triple homicide. The bodies of 3 television employees were found in a parking lot atop Pier 92 on Manhattan's west side, and a woman named Melissa Benson was missing. By the morning after the murders, the NYPD learned Benson was an important witness in a federal fraud case. They traveled to FBI headquarters to see if they could shed any light on the missing woman. Federal agents explained they had been conducting a fraud investigation for the past 8 months. It involved a diamond company in New York, which once employed Melissa Benson. They described how their case began to the New York detectives.
I received a call from an investigator who was employed by the bank in New York City. They had believed at this time that Candor Diamond had defrauded their company of approximately $6.5 million.
Candor Diamond Corporation was a family business owned by a man named Erwin Margolis. Melissa Benson handled his finances. Creditors recently discovered someone at the company falsified documents in order to secure million-dollar loans. The creditors were becoming suspicious, and an auditor was scheduled to inspect Candor's books.
Good for it. Give me the 3 days.
The next morning, the auditor from the finance company began to value Candor's inventory of precious gems and examine their books.
I've got an inventory.
The diamonds Candor had been buying up were worth more than $2 million on paper.
It shouldn't take us long to get this done. We'll take it out.
Now they were missing.
Somebody must have been in there last night. I'm telling you. I'm gonna have to call the police. Let me think. It must have been last night. Somebody must have been in there last night.
Margolis told the auditor he feared they had been stolen.
Somebody had to be in here.
The finance company called the FBI.
We interviewed numerous people that were involved with the company and those people that worked in the vicinity of Candor Diamond. And to a person, they all painted a picture of a company that was in trouble.
Candor was forced into bankruptcy, but proving who specifically was responsible for the scheme would be difficult. FBI agent Don Richards knew he needed to find someone on the inside willing to talk.
The Diamond District is a very, very closed community. And the only way that we saw that we could get into what was going on at Candor Diamond was to find somebody on the inside who was willing to talk with us.
They chose Melissa Benson. She wanted nothing to do with them.
She tried to pretend that she was really an innocent victim of this whole scheme.
Benson avoided them for weeks. Then, suddenly, she asked for a meeting.
Hi, don't get up.
It was January 1982,
Got my attention.
4 months before the mysterious shooting.
I think I got a problem.
She told the agent she was worried about a friend, a woman named Debbie Wong. Benson said she had gotten her friend a job as a bookkeeper at Candor Diamond Corporation in 1981.
How much do you want?
She told the agent Wong had recently disappeared, and Benson feared she might be next. At the time, investigators weren't certain what to make of the disappearance. But now that Benson was also missing, the agents were concerned.
Benson had always insinuated that Wong knew nothing about what was going on and that really all she did was hang out with her. So when she first disappeared, we didn't understand the significance of her disappearance.
On March 25th, Benson pled guilty to federal fraud charges and agreed to testify and tell everything she knew about Candor Diamond Corporation. But the FBI had now lost their witness. For both the FBI and NYPD, finding Melissa Benson was priority one. The investigators headed to Queens to take a deeper look at Benson's missing friend, Debbie Wong. Detectives spoke with two teenagers who witnessed her abduction.
Now, was he driving?
On the night Debbie Wong disappeared, January 5th, 1982, the teenagers told police they saw a woman walking out of an apartment building. When she got to her car, they saw a man wearing all black rush from a van and throw a blanket over her head. The teenagers told police the man shoved her into a car and sped away, and a van followed them. They didn't get a good look at the abductor. 1 week after Debbie Wong disappeared, officers found her car abandoned in a lot on Manhattan's West Side. The car bore few clues to her whereabouts, but police found disturbing evidence. Inside was a single .22 caliber shell casing. The evidence that most concerned police was found on the carpet under the back seat. A small, dark red stain that appeared to be blood. No body was found. The investigators were determined to confirm whether the Benson case and the Wong case were linked. They asked for the evidence from Wong's car to compare with the evidence gathered from the parking pier. One shell casing would be all they'd need. Ballistics tests confirmed what they'd suspected. The casing found in Debbie Wong's car was similar to those found at the parking garage. They'd been fired by the same gun.
That shell casing matched the shell casings from the pier. So it would leave a reasonable person to say, there's a connection.
At the lab, evidence from Debbie Wong's car was tested. They confirmed the dark stain was in fact blood. Genetic markers were consistent with Debbie Wong's blood type. Police now feared she had been killed. Whoever killed the three men in the parking garage and took Melissa Benson also abducted Debbie Wong. Three men were killed at a New York parking garage. Police believed they were executed when they came to the aid of Melissa Benson. She was now missing, along with her close friend Debbie Wong. The two women worked in New York's Diamond District for a man named Erwin Margolis. His company was under federal investigation for fraud, and Benson was providing the authorities information about her boss. Investigators went to talk with Erwin Margolis. FBI agents visited the diamond importer at his home in a Westchester suburb. He told them $2 million worth of diamonds were stolen from his safe, and he had strong suspicions who took them.
Mr. Margolis, do you mind if I ask
He was certain Melissa Benson and her friend Debbie Wong were the thieves.
evening of April 12th? At the club.
Benson had seen the gems and knew the combination to the safe.
Sat around, talked to everybody.
He claimed he was innocent of any fraud. It was all perpetrated by Melissa Benson,
Remember that? We was at the club. My wife
according
and I
to Special Agent
had
Don
had
Richards.
dinner, sat around.
Everything was her fault. She had orchestrated it. She had this strange illness. She was dying. She had been embezzling. She needed money for a cancer operation in Europe, and just on and on and on. The number of things that he came up with as to why she was guilty of doing all of these terrible things to Candor Diamond, unbeknownst to him.
To try and corroborate Margolis' story, agents visited Debbie Wong's husband at his home in New Jersey. He said he had last seen his wife on the day she disappeared. He admitted they had had a fight.
She'd been there for about a year.
He suspected something was going on with his wife and Benson. Melissa had given his wife a blue bag, and he wanted to find out what was in it. It was filled with stacks of documents related to the Candor Diamond Corporation. Debbie was furious he had seen the documents.
My stuff!
He told her to get rid of them. She said she had been holding the bag for Melissa Benson. According to Wong's husband, Benson had stolen the documents because she feared Margolis was planning to set her up to take the blame for his illicit schemes. She needed insurance. And she wanted to keep it safe. So she asked Debbie Wong to keep the documents for her.
Found the bag.
Wong wanted nothing to do with the papers and insisted Debbie get rid of them.
A bunch of invoices, customer invoices.
She stormed out of the house that day, taking the blue bag with her.
Folders or anything, there's stuff.
She returned the bag and the documents to Benson's apartment in Queens.
Miss Wong had visited Miss Benson's apartment in Queens this evening. She had called her husband and told him that she was leaving and was going to be on her way home. It was approximately 7 o'clock in the evening.
It was then that the teenagers saw the masked man shove her into the car and drive off. Debbie's husband never saw or heard from her again.
She got that through her friend.
With a strong suspicion the two cases were related, investigators heightened their search to identify the killer. FBI agent Don Richards.
You start with the known and you keep adding the unknowns and you try to figure out how it fits. One of the first tasks was try to find out who was up on the parking lot that had access. You go through all of the applications, you look for vans.
Of the many parking agreements, investigators found only one van had used the lot that night. But a check of the plates with the DMV came back empty.
One of the detectives came up with a recent parking lot application of a van. Seemed to fit. License plate didn't seem quite right.
Still nothing. Zero.
The license number was a phony.
When I was going through these, this is also
The agreement, however, contained another clue.
doesn't appear to be the same.
And some of the information on there had been scratched out and redone.
A second license number, which had been written and then crossed out, was barely legible on the page.
Through a little bit of forensics, you're able to raise the correct license plate number that was written down, then scratched out.
Investigators hoped this number would lead them to the killer.
Boy.
This time, they got a hit. The plate was registered to a man named Donald Nash. Nash had filled out an agreement for a silver Chevrolet van on April 6th, less than a week after Benson had applied.
This is good. This is real good. You're on your way. And you can feel yourself begin to say, okay, we've got that initial break. We're on the right track.
Police discovered he had been arrested 7 times in the last 30 years on various felony and misdemeanor charges. Donald Nash was now the prime suspect.
And all of a sudden, the adrenaline starts pumping. You're feeling good. You're on the scent, and you're moving. And from there, you just begin to run that out as quickly and as thoroughly as you can.
The FBI ran Nash's name and license plate through their own crime database and got another hit. Nash's van had been linked to an infamous FBI case known as the Pizza Connection.
We found that that license plate had been spotted by an FBI surveillance team that was doing a surveillance on a meeting of some Genovese people in Queens. And we didn't know its relevance.
The FBI's investigation began back in 1979. After mafia crime boss Carmen Galante was gunned down in a Brooklyn restaurant. In the world of organized crime, a shift in power was taking place. If Donald Nash worked for the mob, investigators feared they might never find him or Melissa Benson. The FBI stepped up surveillance outside pizzerias, bakeries, and other known mafia fronts. Agents collected license plate numbers of any and all cars parked in the area. They recorded the license plate of Donald Nash's silver van. For FBI agents, Donald Nash, with his possible links to the mob, seemed an even more likely suspect than their scheming diamond merchant. To determine whether the mob ordered a hit on Melissa Benson, the FBI asked around on the streets.
I had 2 or 3 agents do a little research into our files, speak with their informants, speak with other people to find out if this woman who had been killed in any way was connected, girlfriend, wife, relative of the people that we had under investigation.
Benson had no mob ties. If organized crime hadn't ordered the hit, agents wondered why Nash would be in that neighborhood. They soon made the connection. The spot where Nash's van was seen was just blocks from Benson's apartment in Queens.
We knew from the facts of the pizza case investigation that Nash did not have any relationship with those individuals. However, based on the fact that that plate and that van were at the pier that evening, that there's only one reason that he could have been in such a close proximity to her apartment, and that was because he was surveilling her and that he was interested in determining what her normal activities were.
It appeared Nash had been stalking her. Police continued their desperate search for him, hoping to find Melissa Benson before it was too late. New York police and the FBI were investigating a disappearance of a woman they thought might be linked to organized crime. Mafia crime boss Carmen Galante was gunned down in Brooklyn. During the investigation into his murder, they uncovered their chief suspect's license plate number. The FBI determined their suspect, Donald Nash, and his victim, Melissa Benson, had no mob ties. It did appear Nash was stalking Benson. and his license plate was recorded as part of a surveillance on the Mafia hit. Investigators believed someone may have witnessed the murders and headed back to the pier.
The SS Rotterdam was moored on the west side of Manhattan, getting ready for a cruise. We were desperate to find any evidence at that point that would help us solve the crime. And we realized that there were a lot of people on that ship on deck with cameras. And we asked the passengers if they would share with us their videotapes and photographs to see if, by chance, we might have caught the murder on camera.
Agents interviewed passengers and collected rolls of film. But no one had seen anything, and none of the photos captured the murders or the murderer. As investigators struggled with dead-end leads trying to understand the facts of the crime, they were constantly under the microscope of the New York press.
It was front page on the New York Times, the New York Post, the Daily News. The director of the FBI was getting probably 3 or 4 telephone calls a day from the chairman of CBS wanting to know what the progress was.
The residents of the city seemed starved for any information they could get on the story.
This was better than any kind of Chandler fiction story or Dashiell Hammett detective story. What you had here from the start was anyone who started picking up the stones to see what was going on. You had a tale of greed, embezzlement, murder, missing witnesses, cooked books, very strange witnesses, and also all the participants had checkered or intriguing backgrounds.
Melissa Benson had been missing for less than 24 hours when police received a call that a woman's body had been found in an alley located near Wall Street, a non-residential area that was often desolate after dark. It was the perfect spot to dump a body without being seen. Police scanned the area looking for clues to identify the woman's killer.
It was a factory area, and there was cardboard boxes there. And it was quite evident that there were tire tracks on the cardboard, all of which were photographed and gathered up. Everything down there, even garbage, was gathered up to see if it would have any relationship to the incident.
The tire tracks were a solid piece of evidence for police. But they wouldn't help unless they could find the killer's van. A payphone was next to the body. Police ordered records pulled for it. Maybe someone who had used it had seen the killer dump Benson's body. It was also possible the killer used the phone. Perhaps it held the key to finding the murderer. The body was sent to the morgue. Using dental records, it was identified as Melissa Benson. She had been dead for less than 24 hours. Cause of death, a .22 caliber bullet fired at close range into her brain. The ME determined her death was not instantaneous.
I don't believe that she died immediately. During the forensic and medical investigation, there were particles in her throat that should not have been there, which would indicate that there was 1 or 2 last gasps after she was thrown into the van.
The medical examiner found metal particles, straw, bits of styrofoam, and tiny pieces of cellophane tangled in the victim's hair. None of those materials were found near Benson's body. They must have gotten in the victim's hair inside the getaway van. They were collected to match against the van when it was located. The .22 caliber bullet removed from Benson's body, with its distinctive lands and grooves etched around the outside, was compared to the .22 caliber bullets recovered from the men murdered at the parking garage. The grooves matched. The same man who abducted Debbie Wong also took Melissa Benson.
Our witness is dead. She was killed, along with 3 people who worked for CBS. We don't know who did it. We didn't understand exactly why the connection was there. Somebody killed this woman and the CBS employees. We had to find that person.
To increase their efforts to find the killer, the NYPD and the FBI set up a joint task force.
We closed no doors. Everything was open for discussion. Each of you have a different part. You don't know how it fits together, but you think it does. And over time, you'll find out.
Fortunately, Melissa Benson was a federal witness.
Because Benson was working with the FBI, Agent Don Richards felt an urgency to find her killer.
We couldn't help her after she had been killed. The best thing we could do for her was find her killer. You don't mess with our witnesses. Not and get away with it.
They believe their prime suspect, Donald Nash, had been planning the crimes for some time. Parking lot records showed he had parked at the pier on the same dates and times as Melissa Benson in the weeks prior to her murder. He appeared to be stalking her. Nash's van was registered to a construction company in Midtown Manhattan. Police were dispatched to the scene, but it was empty.
Once we identified Donald Nash, we went to the location that was known to be his business location. His business location amounted to a telephone on a desk in somebody else's premises. He was well known to the area and well liked. He was the local handyman. If you had any problems mechanically or electrically, if you got a hold of Donald Nash, he would take care of it, fix it for you, do whatever you want.
Officers also visited Nash's neighborhood, a rough area of the city known as Hell's Kitchen, run by an Irish gang called the Westies. The MO of the crime made Detective Chartrand suspect Nash was connected to the gang.
But I know that he was using the same technique that some of the, quote, Westies were using, and they were responsible for maybe 17, 18 murders. Always a van, always a small caliber gun, always a shot to the head.
Neighborhood locals had known Nash for years, but no one admitted to knowing his whereabouts, perhaps out of loyalty or fear.
In this area known as Hell's Kitchen, they have their own code, and the code is never give up anybody. Because if you do and it's found out, you're going to be dead very shortly. They'll come and kill you. If they don't, their friends will. So everybody keeps quiet.
With no one talking about Donald Nash, the FBI turned their attention to the only person with a possible motive to get rid of Melissa Benson, Erwin Margolis. Agents hoped to find a link between Margolis and the suspected killer. This time, Margolis agreed to talk, only if his attorney could be present. His story stayed the same. He again pointed the finger at Melissa Benson.
He was not as cooperative as you would expect. He basically tried to place the entire blame on his comptroller and insinuated that she was behind it all.
The diamond merchant denied he knew Donald Nash. He claimed Benson was a criminal and any number of people might have wanted her dead.
problem.
Margolis' attorney, Dave Owen, suggested Benson had taken everyone for a ride, including the FBI.
Sure.
They had no proof to tie Margolis to the murders, and the officers were running out of leads. But the urgency of finding the killer was growing.
The pressure on the political end is increasing. Doesn't matter that it's a weekend, the calls keep coming. Chairman of CBS wants to know, when are you going to make an arrest? Police commissioner, when are you going to make an arrest? The media wants to know, when are you going to make an arrest?
And even though they had a suspect, they had no idea where he was. While they were going over phone records, they got a break. It was a single phone number buried in a mountain of phone records from Lower Manhattan. On the night of the murders, a phone call was placed from the payphone where the body was found to a home in New Jersey. The call was charged to a number in Keansburg, registered to Donald Nash. The FBI now had his address and set up surveillance.
We put a team over there. They barely had set up, and all of a sudden they spotted him. Not the van, but they spotted him. And he was heading off with a friend, and surveillance began.
They soon caught sight of their man, but couldn't approach. There wasn't enough evidence to arrest him, and questions would tip him off. He might run. But watching Donald Nash would not be easy. He was about to take them on a dangerous ride. In April 1982, the NYPD and the FBI joined forces to catch a hired gun. Donald Nash was believed responsible for at least 4 deaths and an unsolved kidnapping. The NYPD had tracked him to his home in Keansburg, New Jersey. Now the FBI took the lead. It was April 17th, 1982, 5 days after the murders, and they were on his tail. Special Agent Don Richards.
We don't have nearly enough to arrest this man. We can't even pull him over unless he's speeding. But let's find out where he is. Let's make sure that he doesn't slip away.
At FBI headquarters in New York, agents got word Nash was on the move, traveling in a red Datsun with an unknown man. According to the DMV, the Datsun was registered to Thomas Dane, who also lived in Keansburg, just a few blocks from Nash. Agents tracked the 2 men to a nearby sporting goods store where they watched them load several large packages into the trunk. They could not identify the items. It looked like camping equipment. But the store also sold high-powered rifles and ammunition. They feared their surveillance might be turning into a cross-country or even global chase once Nash headed for the airport. Agent Ron Moretti still works undercover, and his identity has been hidden to protect ongoing investigations.
Nash proceeded to the Newark International Airport, where they went into the long-term parking area, and Donald Nash got into a black van. Now, we had been given a description that the van used in the murder was a light-colored van, either white or silver. So we were looking for a white or silver van, but we also realized there was a possibility that someone might paint that van.
Though the van was black, agents understood its importance. If this was the same vehicle used in the crime, it may still contain vital evidence. But they did not have enough tying Nash to the crime to get a search warrant. They decided to tail him until they uncovered the proof they needed. Agents ran the plates through the DMV. They had been recently issued and were not yet entered into the DMV database. The agents followed Nash to a highway rest stop. They watched as the men transferred items from the car to the van.
The black van doesn't have the plate on it it should. It's the wrong color. It's the wrong plate. Is it the right van?
One agent went forward to get a better look. The van had hunting decals affixed to the back. Nash might be planning a trip to some sort of rural area. They would have to follow him because they could not arrest him without being certain he was the murderer. If the van didn't contain any evidence, they couldn't hold him. And if Nash was hired by someone, agents also wanted to find that man. Again, he was on the move. And the FBI was in pursuit.
And I had been in constant communication with the surveillance team, and the only thing we had to go on was this van. I mean, if we didn't find the van we were looking for, we would have been in a lot of trouble.
Yet within minutes, agents were faced with a dilemma.
Team 1, I'm staying with the van, and Team 2, Copy, we're going to be staying with the Dotson. And it looks like we're coming up to the split right now.
Roger that.
You guys go ahead and stay with me.
Red Dotson.
They couldn't risk losing Nash and radioed for other agents to watch Dane.
So flying down the interstate with 2 cars on a van, it's probably the most important case that the FBI and the police department are working on in the last month, and you can't let him get away. We had no idea where he was taking us. We had no idea if we had the right van. We had no idea if we had the right man. And we couldn't let him go.
Nash got on the New Jersey Turnpike headed southbound. With 2 carloads of federal agents never far behind.
The New York office was run and supervised by a deputy assistant director by the name of Ken Walton. Ken looked at his surveillance supervisor and told him that he was to have full access to all Bureau aircraft and that they were, quote, not to lose him. And if anybody did lose him, they should not come back to New York.
By day's end, Nash led agents as far as Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He checked into a motel and appeared to call it a night.
My instructions were follow him until we can figure out how we can arrest him. Just don't let him go. Don't let him out of your sight.
Agents kept a close watch on his room. They wanted to get a closer look at the van, but they could not risk getting caught. They waited for Nash to settle in.
Well, let's find out if it is the right van. Let's look on the dashboard for the vehicle identification number.
Auto manufacturers engrave a VIN, or vehicle identification number, on every vehicle, often on the dashboard. It is a unique number. No 2 vehicles have the same VIN. If the ID numbers for this van and the silver van were the same, the men would have their answer. This was their chance.
Now, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. The van's locked. Don't want to spoil anything in there anyway. So the surveillance agent takes a flashlight, shines it around.
But on this night, luck was not on their side. Papers on the dashboard covered the ID number. The FBI would have to wait for the next day and Nash's next move. FBI agents in New York were investigating a diamond company owned by a man named Erwin Margolis. The FBI suspected someone on the inside was defrauding its creditors out of millions of dollars. They focused their attention on the company's comptroller, Melissa Benson. Then Margolis employees began disappearing. A woman named Debbie Wong was abducted outside Melissa Benson's apartment. After Wong disappeared, Benson became frightened and told the FBI she would cooperate with their investigation. Less than a month later, Melissa Benson was shot and killed. She was then loaded into the back of a silver van. 3 men tried to come to her aid and were brutally murdered. Police tried to make sense of the murder scene, piecing together the clues. But they had little pointing them to the killer. The day after she was abducted, Melissa Benson's body was found in a New York alleyway. The murders were front-page news. New York Times reporter Selwyn Robb.
Of course, a murder like this that happens in a very public area, 4 people killed during the evening rush hour, there's going to be enormous pressure.
Police had only one solid lead in the case, and he was hundreds of miles from New York. They were following a man named Donald Nash. He was a suspected killer, but the investigators had no proof he was involved in the murders. They were ordered to keep a close watch on him. Special Agent Ron Moretti.
Our surveillance team had to stay awake 24 hours a day because not only will they follow him when he was driving, but wherever he spent the night, we didn't want Nash to be able to leave without us knowing about it, so someone had to stay awake and keep an eye on the van the entire time. So it was taxing on our surveillance team.
At the scene of Benson's disappearance, witnesses had seen a silver van. Nash was driving a black van agents suspected he may have painted.
He's rolling. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Let's go.
Only looking at the vehicle's ID numbers would confirm their suspicions. But the number was obscured, and now Nash was once again in motion. They continued tailing at a safe distance, with Nash apparently unaware of their presence. FBI Special Agent Don Richards coordinated the search in New York.
The next morning, the people back in New York are trying to figure out what else can we do to tie the van and this man to the murders themselves.
Investigators hit the streets.
Let's check all of the body shops in and around where he lives and see if they had done a job on a silver van, making it black.
For a van.
None of the body shops worked on a silver van in the last 2 days. They were at another dead end.
Well, we could try to get a search warrant on his home to see if there's anything there that could tie it in. We don't have enough probable cause. So, it's getting tougher and tougher.
Once again, detectives in New York turned to phone records to try and tie Donald Nash to the victim Melissa Benson and her boss, Erwin Margolis. Their job was difficult.
Every phone call that was made by Nash, either in New Jersey or in New York, the subscriber to the phone that received the call, and then we got all of their phone calls, and everybody that they ever called. We had a cardboard box piled 2 feet high with telephone records.
Just a few more phone calls to make.
Their goal, to identify every call he made in the months prior to the murders. Maybe they could find a link between him and the victim. Agents knew Nash was in contact with his nephew, Thomas Dane. They staked out his home in New Jersey. Dane had no criminal record, but because they had seen him help Nash make his getaway, detectives suspected he might be involved in the crime. They set up to watch his every move. Agents following Nash tracked him to a campground in West Virginia. He hit the road again with the helicopter in close pursuit. Choppers maintained visual contact with the van from high above, allowing agents to hang back so they did not risk being spotted. They weren't certain he had killed Melissa Benson, but they believed he might be dangerous. Agent Don Richards wanted to make an arrest, and fast.
So we said we've got to find a way to see if we've got the right van.
From the air, the roof of the van appeared to be discolored. A lighter color paint was showing through the black roof of the van. Undercover agent Ron Moretti got the call.
They could see that it was a lighter colored van underneath the black paint. So now we felt more confident that we had the right van.
Nash had now crossed into Kentucky.
The reports I was getting back from the surveillance team were he was getting into some backwoods area of Kentucky, and they weren't sure whether they were going to be able to continue following him. We were concerned that should they lose Donald Nash, we would never be able to find him again.
If the van pulled onto one of the tree-covered roads joining the highway, the chopper might not be able to maintain visual contact. The FBI had to get the VIN number from the van. They put a call in to the Kentucky State Police.
Be advised, vehicles traveling on I-64 westbound around the 59 or 60 mile mark.
Kentucky State Trooper Steve Brote remembers the request.
The FBI asked that we stop a van that was on I-64 traveling westbound and obtain the VIN number off of it.
To the Kentucky State Police, the request sounded impossible.
They said, realistically, you want us to put up a roadblock in the middle of an interstate highway, bring all commercial traffic to a screeching halt to see if you've got the right van. I said, yeah. Fortunately, they were friends of the FBI, and they said they'd give it a shot.
And so a trap was set. Troopers established a roadblock and waited for Nash to approach. If they could see the VIN number when the van stopped and the numbers matched, the FBI would finally have what it needed. Proof the vehicle Nash was driving was in fact the infamous silver getaway van, cloaked in black. The FBI was tracking a suspected killer through Kentucky. They believed he had killed at least 4 people and possibly a 5th. He had pursued Donald Nash from New York, and he was now speeding westward on an interstate highway. The FBI enlisted help from yet another law enforcement agency, the Kentucky State Police. State troopers established a roadblock, hoping to get a glimpse of the VIN number of Nash's van. The FBI had been on his tail for nearly 72 hours straight, and he had done nothing to give them the probable cause to pull him over. If they stopped him without cause, and the van didn't contain any evidence of murder, they could never hold him. For 3 days, Nash had been the model citizen. He didn't even break the speed limit. The FBI and the Kentucky police were counting on their roadblock to give them the opportunity to read the VIN number. When Nash reached the roadblock, a trooper assured him it was just standard procedure. But the view of the ID number was still obscured. Kentucky State Trooper Steve Brote.
Traffic was beginning to back up, so a decision was made to let him go in case something went wrong. We didn't want a bunch of traffic behind us that would be involved in any potential confrontation with him.
They didn't get the numbers. The pursuit of Donald Nash would have to continue. Agents had to find another opportunity. Back in New York, police continued trying to find enough evidence to pull Nash over and make an arrest. Detectives had been piecing together months of Nash's phone records, looking for anything linking him to the murders. Then detectives found it. Nash had made several calls to a man named Dave Owen. Owen was Erwin Margolis' attorney. Nash had called him 3 times in recent weeks. The FBI brought Owen in for questioning. They thought they might have found the connection between Nash and Melissa Benson's boss. When questioned, the attorney insisted it was perfectly logical for Nash to call him. He had recently represented him on a minor fraud case. Special Agent Ron Moretti.
We knew we had to act fast and try to get some type of evidence where we could either get an arrest warrant for Nash or a search warrant for his van and detain him on federal charges or murder charges out of the state of New York.
As the FBI was deciding their next move, Nash stopped of his own accord a few hundred feet up the road.
Hello, sir. Fine. Have your license registration here? Yes, sir.
Because Nash pulled over, the Kentucky State Police could ask to see his license and registration.
You're not from these parts?
And the vehicle ID number, which is listed on the registration.
And after talking to him for a few minutes, I let him go. I gave the dispatcher the VIN number off the van. He ran it through the NCIC computer, and it came back as a stolen vehicle.
It looks like he's headed for the rest stop.
It took only a few minutes to get what FBI agents had waited for days. The VIN number matched the ID number agents had on file for the silver van. The vehicles were one and the same.
This is our suspect.
The Kentucky agents were waiting for instructions from the FBI.
We were following this van at a distance so the driver of it wouldn't see us in the marked cars. We didn't want to spook him and make him do something out of the ordinary. And just about the time we got ready to stop him, the van drives into a rest area.
Nash pulled the van against the curb. The troopers surrounded it. The report of the van being stolen gave them enough to make an arrest.
There's always the potential for violence. He was a suspect in a murder, whether he knew it or not, where a firearm was used. You have to wonder in those circumstances, when I see him, what's he going to do?
Throw the keys out the window. Do it. Put the keys out.
He said, "What's wrong?" And we said, "Well, the van you have has been reported stolen." And he said, "No, there's got to be more than that. This many of you wouldn't be here for a stolen van."
Nash's biggest concern was with retrieving his glasses. He was practically blind without them. He pressed the police to explain the real reason they were arresting him.
We still did not want to tell him that he was a suspect in a murder at the request of the FBI, so we continued to tell him that he was being arrested for having a stolen van. I don't think he ever believed us.
Donald Nash was arrested for driving a stolen vehicle on Monday, April 22nd. In his pockets, some $8,000 in crisp, new $100 bills. The suspected murderer was finally behind bars. But if his van didn't contain evidence of murder, the officers would not have enough to hold him. FBI agents flew to Kentucky to retrieve their prisoner. They hoped he would talk. FBI Special Agent Bob Paquette.
We made an attempt to interview him. He had made it pretty clear to us he was not going to cooperate in any investigation.
With Nash not talking, they had to rely on the evidence.
We then compiled the information, evidence we did have. We made application to the U.S. District Court in Lexington, Kentucky, and was granted permission to search the van.
The van had been hastily painted. In places, the original silver color still showed through. Technicians from the Kentucky State Police worked into the night processing the van. The FBI hoped inside was the evidence to tie Donald Nash to the murder of Melissa Benson and give them some insight into Debbie Wong's whereabouts. First, technicians documented the contents. They collected small pieces of styrofoam, cellophane, and metal scrapings, all items found on Melissa Benson's body. They retrieved a telltale .22 caliber shell casing. The casing would be tested against those found at the pier in New York. Technicians inked the tires and took impressions to try and match them with the impressions found on the cardboard near Melissa Benson's body. Supervisor Larry Ayers turned his attention to the blood.
They were small, but there were numerous blood stains on the van, as well as blood-stained clothing. I was amazed at how much physical evidence there actually was in the van. I wasn't expecting to find very much. It had been several days since the murder had occurred.
The blood was sent to the lab for comparison. Police had samples of Melissa Benson's blood for testing, but because Debbie Wong's body had never been found, they would have to find something to make a comparison. At Debbie Wong's home, officers collected personal items, including a hairbrush and samples of underwear. Forensic technicians analyzed the bits of metal, plastic, and styrofoam recovered from the van. They matched those found in Benson's hair at the time of her death. The blood scraped from the van's interior were of two different blood types, matching Melissa Benson and Debbie Wong. This evidence placed both women inside the van. Ballistics testing confirmed the 3 shell casings found at the pier and the one found in Wong's car were similar to the one found sitting in Donald Nash's van. And the tire marks from the van matched those found near Benson's body.
We had tire impressions left at the crime scene where Miss Benson's body was left, and we matched the tires to that. We found boxes of ammunition unshot. We found in the van bits and pieces of hair, pieces of clothing, human blood.
The forensic technicians found evidence the same caliber weapon was in the van as were the 2 victims, Melissa Benson and Debbie Wong. They had also placed the van at the site where Benson's body was dropped. On April 21st, 1982, Donald Nash was extradited back to New York just over a week after the city was stunned by his vicious crimes. The next day, the quiet suburb of Keansburg, New Jersey, was alive with activity. FBI agent Don Richards,
I sent 2 agents to begin to develop a search warrant based on evidence from the van and everything else we had for the house. We had no murder weapon.
Without a gun, the case still had weak links.
There was a small creek out behind Mr. Nash's house, and we thought there was a good chance that he may have thrown the gun into that creek.
He also might have used it to dispose of a human body. Scuba teams from the FBI, NYPD, and New Jersey police donned gear to search a wide stretch of the creek. Law enforcement searched Nash's home and his garage. Inside, spray paint and a large outline on the floor spoke volumes.
In the garage, we found black paint, some tape, some newspapers that had black paint on it, black paint spray cans. It was on the walls, and it was in a perfect rectangle. Looked like about the size of a van.
It must have been here Nash executed a shoddy paint job, transforming his silver Chevy van into a mysterious black vehicle. While scanning the perimeter of the garage, agents made an unusual discovery. A bullet hole had punctured one of the walls. But even stranger, the wall on the inside was undamaged.
Wait a minute.
Back and forth, they looked outside and found the hole, looked inside and could not. Undercover FBI agent Ron Moretti.
The laboratory guys then took a tape measure and measured the outside of the garage, and they went back on the inside and measured the inside of the garage and found it to be a couple feet short on the inside than it was on the outside.
It became clear a secret room existed somewhere behind the wall of the garage. A hidden door led into a dark crawl space. As agents crossed the threshold, they were prepared for anything. Construction supplies, an arsenal, or the final resting place of Debbie Wong. Police in New York had captured the man who killed Melissa Benson, but her friend Debbie Wong was still missing. They searched a creek behind the killer's house, looking for Wong's body and the murder weapon. Investigators still needed more evidence, according to FBI agent Don Richards.
How's it going? You can put the man in custody at the scene of the crime. You can put his vehicle there. You can put blood and hair from the crime scene in his van. So you can tie him to the van and the van to the killing. That's good. You're still not there, but it's looking better. It's looking a whole lot better.
Donald Nash was a man of many secrets. As law enforcement officials were searching his home, they found a hidden room in the back of his garage. As agents entered the dark room, they found .22 caliber shell casings littered the floor of the small, musty space, hidden behind a fake wall in his garage. It appeared a gun had been fired inside on more than one occasion. Crime scene technicians bagged some of the casings and took scrapings of the reddish substance staining the sink. Blood residue, though whose blood it was, would remain a mystery. Forensic tests would reveal it to be a different blood type than either Benson or Wong. Donald Nash may have used this room to dispose of other bodies. Undercover FBI agent Ron Moretti.
It appeared to us that he had used this room to either dispose of bodies or clean up his van, which would account for the blood being found there.
In the creek behind the house, the murky waters were slow going for the divers. Handfuls of mud had to be sifted inch by inch.
It was as muddy as the Mississippi, and you could not see your hand in front of your face, so it became a groping along the bottom.
But persistence paid off. More .22 caliber shell casings were unearthed. But their next big break came once again from phone records. Police had spent a week analyzing a stack of phone records 2 feet high. Payphones, Nash's phones, and now the phones of Nash's relatives and known associates. They learned weeks before her murder, someone had called Melissa Benson from the home of Nash's nephew, Thomas Dane. Agents asked him to come down to headquarters. Benson's number was unlisted. Police wanted to know how Dane had gotten it. He insisted he never called her and knew nothing about the woman. But as the meeting wore on, Dane wore out. He told police Nash had probably made the call himself to check up on Benson. For detectives, the big question was how Nash knew the number. Nash wasn't talking, but his attorney was. As the FBI's case strengthened, Dave Owen agreed to cooperate.
Finally, he caved in and admitted that he was the one who arranged the meeting between himself and this hitman, and was the go-between between Erwin Margolis and the hitman.
Understand?
Investigators had finally confirmed the link between Donald Nash and Erwin Margolis.
Needs to be gone.
Dave Owen introduced the two in 1981, shortly after Margolis went bankrupt and learned he was being investigated by the FBI. Someone in his organization was talking, and Margolis wanted to know who. He suspected Melissa Benson and Debbie Wong were cooperating with the feds.
He felt that Miss Wong was the weaker of the two women, and if anyone would be cooperating, it would have been her. So I think, in theory, we believe that he had her killed first, believing that she probably was, even though he had no reason to accurately identify that she had met with the FBI.
Margolis' suspicion cost her her life. In exchange for immunity, Dave Owen testified at trial that Nash agreed to kill both Debbie Wong and Melissa Benson for a fee of $8,000.
Best we could figure is the blanket was thrown over her head, gun put to her head, and she was shot once, killed.
Police theorized Nash was assisted by an accomplice who has never been identified. With Wong out of the way, investigators believe Margolis went after Melissa Benson. He hired a private eye to tail her.
Margolis was a paranoid man, and unfortunately for Miss Benson and the FBI, apparently the private investigator saw her go to a meeting with an FBI agent.
Nash tracked Melissa Benson. He chose Pier 92 as the perfect isolated spot for murder. Special Agent Bob Paquette.
We determined that most likely the shooter had been stalking and trying to develop details of the victim's activities, and in fact probably was just looking for the right time and day to complete this murder.
He pulled into a space next to Benson's car on the rooftop lot. Having stalked her for weeks, Nash knew Benson's habits. when she got off work and how long it took her to walk to the lot. For NYPD Detective Chartrand, Nash's brutal crimes didn't match the man.
You could walk past Nash on the street and not even know he was there. He never projected the feeling of a hard-nosed son of a gun.
But he was a cold-blooded murderer. Melissa Benson had no idea what awaited her. She stood just inches from her killer.
In theory only, he was seated in the van when she went to the passenger side of the car to get into the car. He reached out and shot her. The trajectory of the shell casing would go high into the left, and that's how it wound up in the van. He immediately got out, pulled the doors open, threw her in, slammed the door, and then he went about assassinating the 3 witnesses.
Nash was unprepared for witnesses. He reacted on instinct. His eyesight, poor since a childhood accident, required him to chase down his victims. One by one, he shot them at close range. He had to. It was the only way he could see his target. Nash's attack on the 3 CBS employees was quick and brutal. He never spoke to law enforcement about anything that happened that night. New York Times reporter Selwyn Robb.
He was really as hard-boiled and as cold-blooded as they came. And when it came to a criminal code of silence, he was certainly a master disciple of that.
After he left the pier, Nash had to solve the problem of what to do with the body.
He didn't want to drive around in that van with the body in the back. My feeling was that he would have taken her to New Jersey and got rid of her there, in the marshes or whatever. He couldn't take that chance of going through the tunnel with Benson in the back of the vehicle. He went south and dropped the body in Franklin Alley.
He then called his nephew to help him get out of town. Thomas Dane, in exchange for immunity, testified against his uncle. He admitted getting a call from Nash that evening. Nash directed him to the long-term parking lot at Newark Airport, where they dumped the van after he painted it.
It's pretty obvious that he got some help in carrying out this crime, certainly in the escape, if nothing else. Yet there was never a word uttered by him.
With Nash not talking, investigators had to find hard evidence tying Margolis to the murders. If they couldn't uncover any evidence, he might walk free. Melissa Benson was abducted from a rooftop parking garage in Manhattan. 3 men came to her aid and were all shot at close range. The killer drove from the garage in a silver van. The FBI had followed their prime suspect all the way to Kentucky. They felt confident they had the shooter in custody, but he was a hired gun. They suspected diamond merchant Erwin Margolis hired him to kill Melissa Benson and her friend Debbie Wong. They had testimony that he was behind the murder, but they had no hard evidence. The break investigators were looking for came several months after Donald Nash's arrest. Detective Chartrand was called to Melissa Benson's apartment. Relatives packing her belongings found a blue bag filled with documents from the Candor Diamond Corporation. Even after death, Melissa Benson was not silenced.
Usually
actual records.
Investigators believe Debbie Wong returned the bag to Benson the night she disappeared. Benson secretly held on to it, not even revealing its existence to the FBI.
The Internal Revenue people and the FBI presented all of those documents in the case of fraud against the principal of Candor Diamonds. It's all written out here. She left all of this behind. So she was holding the hammer.
Her efforts were not in vain. Erwin Margolis and his associates were arrested in May 1982 on federal fraud charges. Margolis was convicted of fraud and 2 counts of second-degree murder for the deaths of Debbie Wong and Melissa Benson. He was sentenced to 25 years to life for each of the murders. But jail didn't stop Erwin Margolis. He was determined to get even with his enemies.
While he's in jail awaiting trial, through one of the other prisoners, he starts looking for a hitman. He wants to kill the prosecutor. And the fellow at the bank who initially turned the matter over to the FBI. So we thoughtfully learn about this through a jailhouse informant, and an FBI agent posing as a hitman meets with him as a visitor, and he lays out the deal of how he wants these people killed and what he's willing to pay for it. And the tape recording is wonderful. So if he's willing to pay to kill them, we're pretty sure he's willing to pay to kill the other 2 women.
Donald Nash and Erwin Margolis committed a crime that paralyzed New Yorkers with fear and suspicion, and changed the way they looked at their city.
This was an abusive, aggressive, paranoid man who was ruthless in his business dealings. He just wouldn't broach any challenge to his decisions, his authorities, and the way he wanted things done. Didn't matter if it was illegal. Didn't matter if it was immoral. Didn't matter if it was putting anybody else's life in danger. It made no difference.
Donald Nash was found guilty of 4 counts of second-degree murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. He is currently serving 100 years to life.
The people that were involved in the murders in this investigation were the absolute personification of evil. Man treating man very poorly.
Donald Nash currently resides in New York's Auburn Correctional Facility.
Detectives tried to convince Donald Nash after he was convicted to at least give the Wong family a little bit of solace by telling where the body was so they could at least bury her. He denied any knowledge of it.
He has never spoken of the murders. And Debbie Wong's body has never been found.